What's up, you lazy, entitled, basement-dwelling millennials, bootstrapping boomers, apathetic Xers, and goddamn Gen Z kids today? We have got a great guest for you today. Somebody I've been kicking around with on TikTok here for about a year. We've had some really great conversations. He's got some pretty extensive background in law enforcement, which makes this an interesting conversation. He's got some stuff, unfortunately, we can't talk about, and some stuff we can. So I'll kind of let him lead that conversation when we get going, so I don't spill any top secret information that I'm not allowed to share. But I appreciate him coming on here because it's really interesting. Obviously, as most of you know who have followed our content for a while, we have some opinions about law enforcement, and Ricky has some opinions about law enforcement here, because he's a part of it. But he's also trying to work on some reform stuff, which is really cool. And so Ricky, why don't you just introduce yourself, kind of share what you can with us about your career?
No, sure. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I've watched a few episodes here. Mostly followed Off the Wagon on, like you said, TikTok, and really impressed by a lot of the content. So glad to be here. I don't get to do too many of these, so when I do, I try to take advantage of it. But career-wise, I got some diversity there, if you will. After college, I worked in finance and mortgages, and then and some accounting, and I got to spend some time in the recruiting realm. But then for over 10 years, I was in law enforcement, got to see that side of things. So when I see these things show up on the news, that I mean, only the worst things get the most attention, of course. I have a particular view about it that coincides with a lot of the things you said, but may have a little bit of a different tilt to it. But in my off time, in my life outside of that, of course, I prioritize family. I have first a follower of God first, Jesus Christ. I'm a Christian by practice. I have a lovely wife that I've been dating since high school, and then two young babies. Or they're not that young anymore. They're 6 and 3. Anyway, the goal outside of that is to try to make the world a better place, like raise the frequency of the planet a little bit. And the primary way I've been trying to do that is a unity effort of ceasing this practice of divisiveness or dividing each other, especially based on skin tone. So that's why I started the company I have, American Redneck Company, this, with the goal of the end race in America. We specialize in firearms, and I know you've had a podcast about that before, so I certainly would love to get into that and try to explain that we're looking for equity. Not just equity and outcomes, but equity and opportunities. And one of the opportunities, Second Amendment, everybody own a gun, all that stuff. But yeah, it's a unifying effort. It's a community-based effort. I started it with my neighbors and my wife, and my neighbors, and that's pretty much it. And yeah, it's about ending race in America. We've got a lot of very good encouragement from all around the world. Some pretty good backlash too from certain people who love race and hate what we're doing, but that just confirms what we're doing. But yeah, I'll answer any questions. I don't go read my whole Wikipedia page. I'll
Right.
let it flow naturally.
Well, awesome. Let's before kind of we get into some more of those hard-hitting questions, just tell us. Obviously, I always struggle with these conversations with you because you don't want to talk like race, but
Fair enough.
uh,
And you
you
can. You're not.
right.
We'll discuss that. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna slam anything you say.
Uh-huh.
We gotta. I don't know how old you are specifically, but you've got a lifetime of indoctrination that I'm trying to fix. So I can't fix it all in 1 hour. We'll go from there.
Well, you're a person with slightly more melanin, and that comes with certain repercussions in our
Love
society,
that.
unfortunately. And so you have some different experiences in life, obviously, than the rest of us, and especially in law enforcement. And I was hoping you could tell us about your experience in law enforcement and kind of how that has gone being a member of a marginalized demographic.
Oh, I love that. So, real quick, just again, I'll probably take a minute and a half to explain. I was born in New York, but raised in Southern Georgia. So race had a different effect based on geographically where you're going to be located, right? But from a very young age, I always questioned race. I remember clearly when I was 4 years old asking my mom, why are we calling Michael Jackson a guy where Why are we calling him a black guy? Especially, he's so light. Wouldn't he be a white? And then the way he looked, I said white women. I was confused about the rules, but especially the rules on race. And it kept being told to me that no, you're black. That's what we identify as, and certain people are white. And it didn't make sense. If I'm bronze by color, why am I calling myself black? Now, funny, most of us know this. Most of us will question this, and we just eventually come to accept it. But like you said, growing up and watching how powerful that divide is, like no matter how good of a friend you think you got, you get around certain people, there's supposed to be this divisive line. There's the white side and the black side. Well, I
Yeah.
got sick of that really quick and pretty much bucked that trend from when I was 10 years old all the way through adulthood. But some of the things I saw, like in the education system, of again that constant separation, and then the uneven hand of justice based on what you look like, you might get a little more or a little less punishment. I saw that transition over to corporate America when I was doing finance, mortgages specifically. I watched people get higher interest rates based on their skin tone, or lower interest rates, or more likely to get approved or disapproved based on their skin tone. But it was when I got into law enforcement that initially I celebrated, because I'm like, finally, I'm done with this whole race dig. I don't have to be concerned about it. Everything's about justice and being honorable and integrity and all that stuff. Well, what I started to notice rather quickly from the law enforcement side is anybody I investigated, if you had a darker skin tone, it was took very little effort to open an investigation. It took very little effort to get an indictment. The prosecution was always motivated and willing to go, and then the sentences would be much higher. Whereas if you had a lighter melanin, more along to your side, or about your skin tone, I couldn't get an investigation started to save my life. So I started to back off a little, and participate more on protecting people as opposed to investigating people, and that's where I've stood. But you could look it up in any newscast. It is an ongoing concern, and I understand why people want to burn things in the street. I understand why people want to throw fits and protest. But what I have encouraged people as a way to change this, instead of protesting and instead of yelling about it all the time, actually join law enforcement. Be one of
Yeah.
the good people that discourage some of these things from happening, because even just by being there, by being present, it's harder for bad people to do bad things. It's harder for people to overstep, or even if they're not trying to do bad things but they just got a blind spot because they have zero empathy for somebody of a different skin tone. It's harder to do that when good people are around, good people are watching, and then good people may more likely, or more likely to do something about it. But one specific thing that I don't mind sharing, I remember this clearly. I was in law enforcement at the time, participating in a search warrant of a home, and it was a darker skinned family, about my skin tone, and I'll never forget there's a kid in the house as well, and it's a little cool. It's like 50 degrees outside, so it's cooler in the house because all the doors are open. And I remember the little kid wanted to be next to the parent who's handcuffed on the couch, and me knowing that they're gonna not see each other for a while, I tried to link them up, but I wasn't allowed to do so. It was almost like they weren't viewed as human, and and although we knew they weren't going to be around each other for a while, this was the last time, at least for a few days. We I was overruled in letting those parents and get with their child. So I think I would have approached that differently as with my age now, and if I had children at the time, which I didn't. But those are some of the things I saw. Whereas, like I said, I watch people who've either we suspect of crimes, or I know committed crimes, but I can't open up an investigation on them.
Yeah.
But and these were some of the decisions were made by the same people. I know I'm not being too specific, but
Right.
because I'm kind of trying to be careful.
Well, and so obviously we have pretty stark differences when it comes to opinion, and we'll get in that when it comes to how this reform could be made, because you definitely are preaching change from the inside, and
Certainly.
I don't think that that's possible, but we'll get into that, kind of talk through the details of that a little bit more here. But
Certainly.
kind of what it sounds like to me is you're saying that you know the race thing was something that you dealt with your whole life, and then you get into law enforcement,
Certainly.
and when you
Yep.
get into law enforcement, if you're a law enforcement officer, you're blue before you're black or you're white. But the people that
Depends
you're
on the situation. Yeah.
but the people that you're enforcing the law on are still very much black or white. And
Right.
that's kind of, and so you saw that, And that is obviously has to be upsetting coming from, you know, a marginalized community, and seeing that. And that's kind of what has, if I'm understanding correctly, was kind of been the driving force between your push to try to get reform in law enforcement, and the efforts that you're working on.
Well, that's partially true. I'm trying to get reform in the United States as a whole. For instance, I'm only seen sometimes as a marginalized community because I keep getting designated as a marginalized community. I will identify as American before anything else. And when people call me black, I try to explain where that came from and why that's not something we want to continue to
Right.
do. The thing why I put "in race in America" on front of everything I have is because I hate it so much. And the reason I hate it so much is because it works so well.
No.
I had a leadership course 2 weeks ago about the Battle of Antietam.
Yep.
Right. I'm sure you're very, very, very well versed in this.
I am.
And it was great as long as we kept it restricted to the Battle of Antietam, the decisions that the leaders made, the technologies they had. Well, what it kept bleeding into was, yeah, this was about partially about slavery. Black people were slaves, and they weren't getting treated so bad according to the historian. So I had to straighten him out. And what I explained to him and what I explained to you and all of our viewers is the problem starts with we divide each other based on skin tone, saying they're black, they're white, less than human, not less than human. Where I always say, hey, we're way more alike than we are different. And as opposed to calling each other black or white, we should have been calling each other American the whole time. See, saying somebody is in a marginalized community or black is not the answer to the issue. It is literally the cause, and it's continued way before our lifetime. If we don't put a stop to it, it's going to continue after our lifetime. So yes, I'm trying to change it in law enforcement, but it's not just law enforcement. It's in corporate America. It's in the medical field. It's scholastically. It is literally everywhere you look, because race is
Absolutely.
everywhere you look.
I mean, institutionalized racism is something. I mean, that is the foundation of our country, sadly.
Right.
And I totally get that.
It's part of it.
And I do, again, I do think that we have some differences in opinions on this, partially because a lot of times the people who are like, I don't want to talk about race. Talking about race is why racism exists. Are always the most racist people in the room. You know what I mean? And I'm saying that as a white person. Then that being said by white people, it's like it's always so and so, certain people talking about race. It's always, and they're the real racist people. It's not me just thinking that black people are inherently more criminal than white people or something like that. That's not racist. It's you talking about how that's racist. That's racist. And so I think that there's a fine line, and we've talked about this before, but I want to get started off, I think, just talking about the overarching theme of policing in America.
Sure.
That is kind of what I think you sort of bring a little bit of an insight to that we don't necessarily have. And we don't normally get the opportunity to talk to somebody on this side of the aisle because a lot of times I don't know what it is, but these people don't want to talk to me. I can't imagine.
Well, there are a lot of people who, if you bring facts to them and if you bring genuine to them, they're gonna back off because they know a lot of the things they're saying or thinking are wrong. And I encounter that all the time when people have just completely condemned certain areas of town because there's a bunch of people in the area that don't look like them, as opposed to looking at the good and the bad, or give people a pass based on skin tone. That's a very real issue. That's a very real issue.
Absolutely.
And of course, if you confront them with them, they're not going to want to talk about it. So yeah, especially not with you.
Yeah.
No.
So Taylor brought up some statistics here. I'm gonna let him kind of take it from here. He had some questions for you.
Let's
So
do it.
yeah.
So one of the I did obviously some research on this for this topic in this podcast. Mainly, I started with people who were for abolishing police or prison or police reform, and but basically abolishing the need, the necessity for either one. And I wanted to.
That'd be a good topic one of these times. Just abolishing prison because Nick Powers the other day, I saw you saw his video about Trump and going to prison and prison reform and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, obviously he should still be able to vote as a felon and all that stuff.
So I think we should make not today, but I think that should be a topic we cover at one point too. I like that.
Yeah, and so obviously when you hear abolish the police, that probably feels pretty personal, and you probably have a reaction that is like, why, that seems very unfairly targeting somebody who's just trying to do good in the world.
And I do want to make a clarification here because I think that this gets really muddied. Is abolish the police and defund the police are two very different things. And
Depends on who you
defund,
talk to.
right?
But
And defund the police does not mean defund the police. I really think that a better terminology for that is refund our communities, which is taking the same allocations, resources that we have that we put into policing and not expecting police to be a marriage counselor and a social worker and a public health official, an EMT, and like all of these different things, and being like, you have one job and you can be really good at one job, or you can be utterly mediocre or really bad at a lot of jobs. It doesn't matter what that job is. And as hard as it is a lot of times for me to have empathy for law enforcement because I get really frustrated with a lot of the things that go on, it is one of the things that I do empathize. When they say it's a hard job, I think a lot of times that's misdirected, but it is absolutely a hard job because they are expected to do a lot of things that there's no crossover, and they're expected to do that with not a whole lot of training and not a whole lot of understanding. I mean, when it comes to dealing with people with mental health issues, when it comes to dealing with domestic abuse, when it comes to dealing with all of these kinds of situations, you can't do that and then also deal with a bank robbery. Like, those are two very different things. You know what I mean? Right. And so I think it's important that defund the police is, we still need police. We just want to take some of the resources we're allocating to them and put it towards more productive aspects to make everybody's job easier and communities safer. Where abolishing the police is, getting rid of them altogether. So two different things, and I think that that's just an important distinction.
Well, I love what you stated there between bank robber or somebody suffering a mental health episode. The problem is you don't know what you're going to get, and you're trying to respond to it as fast as possible. So having somebody that's cross-trained in all these different disciplines, whether you're going to have to stop somebody from bleeding out, like you said, stop a robbery or a bank robber or kidnapping, or somebody having a mental health episode, that's the best we have. Now, but when I hear abolish the police or defund the police, and I know they're two different things, I completely understand. I completely understand watching how it's affected some communities more than others, or some people based on your skin tone or your background more than others. My putback to this is always just about the same. As opposed to abolishing the police, like you alluded to, changing it from the inside, going for these local positions. Like I went to runforsomething.net from your last podcast.
Yeah.
There are positions where you can get a lot of influence as opposed to just speaking from the outside, changing it from the inside, or in some cases above. So I understand the standpoint in it. However, abolishing the police leads to what? Anarchy. I don't think that's a good option. And although I do know
statistically that's not necessarily true either, but we can get into that a little bit here.
Okay,
but
fair enough. Fair enough. I know the origins of the police. I think mainly thanks to one of your one of your videos. And
slave catchers.
Right. So there's a lot of good that come out of policing as well. I mean, there's a lot of people that protect schools, protect churches, and we can go on. But I do understand when I hear defund the police or abolish the police, I don't get angry about it. I simply am looking for a solution as opposed to constantly repeating the problem.
Absolutely.
Fair enough. And yeah, so that I mean, obviously, what I hear all the time is like, well, what about the murderers or the rapists that happen? It's like, obviously, police are sometimes good at dealing with investigating those sort of situations, and sometimes it requires, especially for like sexual assault type situations, potentially not the best person to deal with them. But putting those things aside, because they are such a seemingly small aspect of a police officer's day-to-day duties, at least if you look at the amount of what type of crimes are actually happening, it's like less than 1% of what the sort of crimes that you guys are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Mainly the crimes that I'm sure that you're dealing with are theft, larceny, motor vehicle theft, burglary, and then aggravated assault is right up there, which I could certainly understand the necessity for a enforcement response. I don't know. I don't want to say armed response, because there's a lot of police officers, a lot of police units around the world who don't carry firearms, and they still deal with these
I don't think your standard
beat
cop should carry a firearm. I think that as soon as you put a gun in somebody's hand, their motivation to de-escalate a situation goes out the window. And we see around the world, we're one of the very few armed police forces,
And not
universally
only,
armed police forces.
not
I
only
mean,
armed, but like militarized.
Yeah.
Armed, like AR-15s and body armor, which is, we can those. I don't think that's necessarily what we need to be discussing today. Is like the particulars of what kit you should be walking out the door with.
right.
Other than just like de-arming, I would like to hear what you have to say about that. I agree with Jordan.
Well, you never know. Like I said before, you never know what you're going to get into. There are plenty of citizens with AR-15s and body armors, and to have to be able to meet or exceed the threat. That's why we carry a lot of things we carry. For instance, I've been to Vietnam before, where a lot of the police officers had size. So because they're meeting the threat of the population, right? Most of the population there is unarmed. But if you go to a lot of places where the population is unarmed, the police typically are, because again, they're meeting threats that are unknown. You could have people who had legally smuggled in guns, and yes, might be just 1%, but you don't know if you're going to be the lucky one that day. So I get the idea to. I get why you say that it's okay if we walk around disarmed, and putting a gun into somebody's hand probably takes away a lot of that motivation to de-escalate. However, that comes to hiring. You want people who want to de-escalate and see the gun as a last resort or a necessary or a tool only when it's necessary, not because it gives them power.
I think I'm gonna take that one step further, and even if you have a great hiring policy and can somehow manage to not get the guys who were bullied or peaked in high school and are on a power trip and give them a gun and a way to go, harass pretty girls on the side of the road. Even if you take that away and you get rid of all those people and you have 100% good officers, people who are in a interaction with an officer, a lot of times this is one of the scariest moments of their life, and a firearm causes them to escalate, even if it doesn't necessarily cause the officer to initiate that escalation, and you can't work around that. And here's my thing. We have armed response teams. We have SWAT, a specialized armed response team. And in a situation where there is an armed altercation, usually the best thing you can do is step back and make them not feel like they're cornered and they have no other way out, which is exactly what they're going to do when they're surrounded by armed people. And the longer that they have to sit there and cool down, you can call a SWAT response and bring the armed trained people to that situation when needed. And often that's going to be safer. And I mean, we've seen this repeatedly with officers escalating a situation into a shootout that would have probably ended in absolutely no fatalities, and then multiple people died, be that officers or innocent people or a combination of both, or the suspects. A lot of those situations, had an officer retreated, we have great resources at tracking people down. Letting them get away for a short period of time is often exponentially safer than worrying about meeting the threat where it's at when it's at. And that's where I think that not having every beat cop armed in that situation and having a team that's ready to respond when those situations arise would be a lot safer.
No, that's very fair, because there are policies in certain departments where they're not going to chase. They're not. It's not worth it. It's not worth the danger to the public. But I'm going to push back. I know before I was in law enforcement, if an officer came along, I didn't get escalated because he had a gun. In fact, maybe he came along because there's a problem, and I started to feel a little better because I knew I wasn't committing a crime. And as long as I was respectful, officers were always very nice to me. And I mean, from being a very little kid on. Now, regarding the immediate response and a specialized team. Well, specialized teams are just that, they're specialized. And the response is not going to be as quick. And that's a problem when you're dealing with a school shooting and all you got are officers around, or one officer or two officers showing up. They got to go in and deal with that problem.
A school shooting is a micro, it is statistically insignificant. I mean, they're horrible events, and I'm not trying to take that away, but statistically basically non-existent when it comes to the amount of interactions. Most people will never ever have an interaction with an active shooter in their entire lives. And not taking school shootings, just mass shootings in general. An active shooting incident is something that almost no one will ever experience, including police officers. And then historically, police officers have not stopped those situations, even though they were already armed and on scene. I mean, we have had
Uvalde's the biggest one, most recent one,
Yeah.
obviously, that you can point to.
Valdi's one of the worst examples of responses that we could probably have on video or have on record.
Right.
There are many instances, however, where law enforcement did respond and stop the threat. I can think of a mall in Florida where a gentleman ran up and stopped the threat. But the thing is, those aren't going to make the news as much.
No, I mean, they still do, and we still hear about them.
We hear about them, but nowhere near as much as if there weren't officers there or there were officers not outside doing the job that they were supposed to be doing. So, and I go back, yes, the chances of a school shooting happening are remote, thank God, because my kids are in school right now as we speak. However, you can't bank on the fact that it's not going to happen to you. You have to be prepared for those responses. And I'm not, I'm all about law enforcement officers being armed, but I'm also all about them being trained and hired properly and reinforced properly, and having that oversight to where if we have somebody getting out of line where they're power hungry or on a power trip, that they're coached the correct way or removed or whether be terminated, reassigned, what have you. It's something we have to keep an eye on for sure, but it's a necessary evil because of the potential threat. Not to say it's a definite threat,
No.
but the potential threat is absolutely out there, and that is also measured or dictated partially based on how you look and where you are. Like certain areas are going to be targeted more than others, right? Somebody mentioned this is not true. That is not true in Baltimore. My wife works in Baltimore, and I love the fact that there are police there ready to react in case somebody had to protect her. Because it's just the reality we live in. So.
Yeah, I think, again, and I know that you and I are always going to have a little bit of a different perspective on this.
That's always a good thing.
It is, and I'm glad that we're able to have these conversations. And I think we've presented on this particular topic well enough. Kind of both things.
I appreciate that.
And no need to keep beating this one to death. What else did you have here, Taylor?
Yeah, I guess I just sort of wanted to talk to speak to your mentality as a police officer and how you just sort of approach the job. And so I just have a couple things to run down here, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I guess as a police officer, do you feel like police officers are set up to be successful as officers, or did you feel like it is to be walking into a bad situation day one?
Hard questions, man.
No, that's perfectly fine. So I'm going to qualify my statement, okay?
Yeah.
Because although I worked in law enforcement for over 10 years, I never held the title of police officer.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, fair
Worked
enough.
alongside of them quite a bit. I've done operations with them enough to give you some educated insight, if you will.
Sure.
But I don't want to.
You were never a beat cop. You were never a traffic cop.
I
You were
wanna-
never sitting in a squad car pulling people over and giving them traffic tickets.
More than you might imagine, but I don't want to misrepresent myself. But
Yeah.
I will say there's that mentality of I don't want to call it brotherhood because they're sisters too, fellowship and protection. And the reason you see that blue wall come up so bad because or come up so quickly in a lot of instances is because when you ask if they're set up to succeed, the ones who feel like they're set up to succeed is because they have each other's back. And if they know they're going to go into a dangerous situation and they only have one person with them, that person will put their life on the line to protect them. They'll put their life on the line to protect that person. Regarding the resources, and I've been all around the United States, I've been all around the world dealing with law enforcement, to be honest with you, it really depends on where you are. It really depends on where you are, who's in charge, it's not just what state, what area of a state, what jurisdiction. So to give you a definitive answer of yes or no on that would be disingenuous. I will say there are many police officers who love their job. They love serving the community. They love helping people. Their best stories are how they protected somebody or how they saw a child start breathing again because they gave the baby CPR, or how they stopped a domestic what was a potentially domestic dispute. They nobody got arrested, and the couple's getting along today. I hear a lot more of those success stories than, oh, dude, I shot that dude and I got away with it, or we're gonna get to arrest this guy. Of course, we're not gonna say stuff like that around people like me, but. And when I say people like me, people who will just do the right thing. I'm not basing that on skin tone, but people who will call them out on their BS. So Overall, or at least in my view, there's a lot of police that feel they have the internal support, but the external support is what's the scariest. There are a lot of people getting out of policing right now because they feel that there's constantly a chance to be crucified if they make a mistake or they're getting recorded. They may have done the right thing, but if they get recorded from the right angle and the video's edited properly, you could just get vilified. So they're scaring a lot of people out of policing right now.
Okay, and
But
I want to push back a little bit on that
sure.
statement right there, because I feel like that is always the narrative that we get from people in law enforcement, is that oh, our job's really hard, and like if we make one misstep, then everything is my life is over and I'm gonna get vilified and all of that kind of shit. And it's like statistically, I mean, officers are very, very rarely held accountable. There's very little accountability for these actions, and they fight tooth and nail against that accountability. And the reason that everybody pulls out a cell phone when there's an interaction with a law enforcement officer is because that's the only chance that they feel that they would have some form of accountability. I mean, the George Floyd incident, nobody would be in prison for that was it not recorded from multiple angles, and that sort of thing. We see this over and over and over again, and then we see it where people get recorded. It seems clear as day to everybody else that this person murdered somebody or brutally beat somebody or violated somebody's civil rights, and they don't get indicted. They don't have any repercussions but a paid vacation, and that gets so when we hear that, oh, poor me, I'm getting out of the field because if I get filmed from the wrong angle and it's edited sort of thing, it's like, it's your own fucking fault, not you specifically, but it's the
No, I get it.
it's the police union's fault, it's the law enforcement agency's fault for pushing back on accountability to insane degrees. I'm on a little bit of a rant here, but Ford was going to put in seatbelt monitors that would automatically report if officers were wearing their seatbelts to their superiors. That was all it was going to do. And the police union fought back so hard that, we can't have that kind of accountability. That's going to interfere with our ability to do our job, yada, 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 that they took it out. Now, I can get a ticket. I have gotten a ticket for not wearing a seatbelt. But you can get in a cop car and go do whatever you want. And it's that sort of thing, is they fight back on accountability even for the most trivial bullshit. And so obviously they really fight back on accountability for stuff that's not trivial. And so when they say that there's a chance that I might be held accountable or might be falsely held accountable because people are over vigilant about accountability now, it's hard to have empathy in that situation, if you catch my drift. And I hope that doesn't sound too harsh, but
Come on, man. You're not gonna, I've got thicker skin than that. So, first of all, I love accountability. Absolutely love it. I'm all for it, because if you're doing the right thing, you don't want to be grouped in with the people who are abusing the position, or harming people unnecessary, and being irresponsible. As for the camera part, oh yeah, I suggest that everybody start recording. I'm not against recording at all. What I was getting at was people who are on the side of law enforcement, and maybe they show up to do their job. All they see is their partner in a fight. They're not completely aware of what's happening, but they're going to try to break up the fight or try to help their partner make sure he doesn't get choked out. Well, then getting caught up and ending up on the crucified angle. The other part of this, and this is big on law enforcement. You mentioned you get a gun, you get a badge. Well, guns have real bullets, and you're always at risk, because if you're walking into dangerous situations or unknown situations, that constant stress of, oh, is this my last day? I mean, you're law enforcement or military, you're going to be able to relate either way. That takes its toll as well. And if you feel like society or community isn't supporting you, or worse yet, you're now a target to get hurt because you're in policing, that kind of stuff is what's driving people all out of law enforcement, which is why I keep saying I want more good people to join law enforcement. I'd like to make it more of a focus of community policing, and some communities do that very well. But I completely understand everywhere you're coming from, and in case you can't tell, I agree with most of it.
yeah, no, I know. And like, obviously I wouldn't have you on here if I didn't think that it was at least a productive, open conversation where we could find some common ground. We're doing the live for everybody on the
Ginger ale, by
podcast.
the way.
We're drinking beer.
Yeah. And the story of why I am pointing that out is incredible. One day we will talk about that, but we can't talk about it.
All right. Speaking of what we can't talk about, though, somebody in the comments did ask, because you said, you weren't like a beat cop police officer in that respect. To clarify your role, once again, I know
Sure.
more than we can share, but as much as you can clarify would be appreciated, just for as much transparency's sake as possible. I want to make sure that that's up
So
front.
no, that's perfectly fine. I worked on the federal side. Worked coincided with a lot of other federal agencies, so within the government, and also a lot of local and state police agencies, both domestic and foreign. And that's probably as far as I'm going to go. But well, this is a good point. I think a lot of people, regardless of career, right? Whether it could be law enforcement or attorneys or whatever it is, they make themselves completely about what they do versus who they are. So I have always tried to put a premium of I'm not law enforcement. I'm a good person who happens to be in law enforcement, or I'm a person trying to be a good person who happens to be in law enforcement. So I focus on the things that I can think I can make a positive change with, which is why I always introduce myself as a company owner, entrepreneur, FFL, or gun dealer, trying to get people who normally wouldn't get guns, or not normally, not legally, but the ones who aren't marketed to as much. Like I try to get mothers to get concealed carry permits, concealed carry classes, and learn how to react with weapons. So to answer that as much as possible, on the federal side, work with state and local, both domestic and foreign, but I focus more on what I do outside of that realm versus inside, especially in my free time.
Yeah.
So were you as cool, or are you as cool as Mine Hunters? Like how, have you seen that show?
No, I haven't, and that's because I don't watch enough TV. To,
Yeah. Okay.
it's kind of embarrassing because recently, I mean, I stopped gaming TV. It's always if I'm sitting down doing nothing, I better figure out something to do. So I will step back and start binge watching something eventually, but I haven't watched TV in a while, to be honest with you.
No, fair enough. So along the line of feeling, whether or not, internally or externally, you're, good with success, or will be our setups for success. Sorry. I guess for just general, beat officers, police officers, how do you feel like they should be defining success? Like, if in the business world where I work, they're always saying, like, what are your key performance indicators? What are your KPIs that we're going to measure you upon to show that you are actually successful in your position? What do you feel like? Do you feel like there's a difference between what people are dealing with now, what they're just graded on success, versus how they should be? And I guess what are those differences if they exist?
So one, it depends on the area geographically.
Yeah.
I would tell you, I've seen different focuses or different priorities set where there's metrics for in some areas. How many tickets have you written, or how is your community? How is the speed level around this area? Are you having the right tickets, or are we just positioned in the right place?
Quotas.
But one thing correct. But one thing that is universal amongst law enforcement: are you making it home today? That's a measurement of success. Did you make it home today? Did you help anybody today? Did you make sure not to cause any unnecessary harm or damage? I think it's a lot of the good officers, the good people I've been around that are in law enforcement, that's their primary focus: getting back home to their family and doing as much good in the world as possible. And
So-
as corny as that sounds, you don't hear it that often because it's not going to make the news.
Well, I mean, we do hear it a lot, honestly. I mean, that's the whole thing from law enforcement side is, I'm just worried about making it home to my family at the end of the day. And you hear it, but once again, and we've had this conversation before. Actually, this is kind of how we got started off interacting. It really is. Law enforcement isn't that dangerous. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's certain risk involved with law enforcement, but when we were comparing law enforcement to other dangerous jobs, it's relatively safe. And then a lot of the danger comes from just driving a car. It's why, delivery drivers have a more dangerous job than law enforcement, because they spend all day behind the wheel, and it's just cops get in a lot of car accidents. That's something that really increases their risk. COVID shot up through the roof as far as like danger, and a lot of that had to do with identity politics and that sort of thing. As I'm not going to wear a mask in my interactions, and I don't believe COVID's a fake conspiracy, and I'm too tough to die from a stupid virus, and then they died from a stupid virus type of thing. So when we really get down to felonious deaths for law enforcement officers, the things that they're worried about coming home from at the end of the day are not that high, but they treat it. It's very much ingrained in law enforcement from training. We've talked about this from training through just the reinforcement of the culture is, I'm going into a war zone, these streets are dangerous, I may never make it home, I could get shot at any instant. And then every time a cop does actually have a felonious death, suffer a felonious death, which is, any death is tragic, but every time that happens, it is plastered all over the news. We talk about, the bad things that cops do and that getting all the attention, but not the good stuff. But also when cops are subject to a gunshot, even if they don't die from a gunshot wound, if they are shot, you hear about it forever, and all the flags are at half-mast, and it's a big deal. So that just perpetuates that culture, that idea that every interaction I have with this little blonde girl I just pulled over on the side of the road could be my last day on Earth, and that obviously changes the way that you interact with the public, interact with the world, interact with the way that you see your job and yourself. And I think that as being, as you said, a metric of performance, like, do I make it home at the end of the day, is really unhealthy and really damaging, because that...
Oh, it's very unhealthy. No, I'm not saying it's healthy.
Okay.
But I'm just saying what's real. Like that is the primary concern that I can tell you firsthand. But back to a lot of the points you were making. For those who haven't seen it, you made a really good video on it, and of course it's one of my favorites because I'm kind of in it. So I encourage all the viewers to go check that one out, because it made a lot of those good points and more. And of course they're entertaining to watch. But regarding the percentage, it's not that I'm going to die every day. Oh, no, I only get to do that once. But it's the constant threat. And as law enforcement, you're the one expected to go into the danger. And we get really pissed when they don't. Take it, the school shooting in Texas, okay? So if you're the one always responsible to react, you're the one always waiting on the call, you're always, and in a lot of cases, because, again, you're one person responding to a dangerous situation, you don't know if it's going to escalate or go down, regardless of what you do. That constant feed of adrenaline, or that constant stress, is what I was talking about as impending danger.
I get that too, but they signed up for the fucking job. If you signed up for sanitation and you got to deal with shit every day, you can't go, and that's sort of the thing, is like, they signed up for it, and
not only did they sign up for it, that job in particular, its goal is to do the opposite of causing harm, which is obviously what you said. You said do no harm.
Right.
So to specifically go into that job where the day one, in my opinion, is to do the least amount of harm and the most amount of good, to do anything in any way that does end up doing harm, and having that not be a cultural, to having the position of being a police officer, like, core. I feel like the fact that the immediate response is, well, it's dangerous. Well, that doesn't feel like a great response, considering, it's the 20th most dangerous job in America.
No, fair enough. Fair enough. No, I'm not going to say it's as dangerous as, like, going down in mines, mining for whatever. The statistics are all you guys. Don't get me wrong. Well, all I'm saying is it is a job that has inherent risk. Yes, you do sign up for it. And you're just hoping to make it home at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I know what I'm about to set off, so I'm going to go, but I'm going to say it because I'm prepared for this. But if it was super common that we had a bad cop, or that most law enforcement agencies had a majority of bad people, I don't think we'd be in existence, right? There's a lot of people out there doing a lot of good things, calling out the bad things when necessary, but the bad things make the news the most. That's what we're going to constantly see. That's what we're going to be constantly reinforced. But
I guess,
everybody is doing.
I guess my question is, what would you say 50 years ago when...
Thank God I wasn't here.
No, I understand that, but like the evolution of policing has obviously varied from slave catchers to where we are today. So, at what point do you feel like you would no longer are we working on the behest of a racist institution across the country to now we're actually majority good people? Like, how do you draw that distinction? How can you defend that?
Yeah, I mean,
Now,
because at
see,
a certain point, the good community police officers were beating up people at a sit-in because they were violently sitting at a
yeah,
table waiting for a meal or riding a bus or
right,
something along those times. And that was the same thing. Is these are good people and they're just doing their job and they're just. I mean, it's
right,
always been the excuse, and it's kind of like it's still the exact same thing we hear every time this
yeah.
happens, and it's
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And to answer that, I say that it is going to be a constant work in progress now and in the future. Now, I believe we've improved significantly from 50 years ago with those sit-ins, and I've done enough studying for that era to. It makes me mad if I study it too long. So when it comes to now and not viewing, oh, it's a darker skinned guy, that's a threat, or it's a darker skinned area or lighter skinned area, that's a threat. That's where I've come in with the, hey, stop looking at people as black or white. Let's look at them as human first. And don't call people black or white at all. I came up with this number scale of a melanin, like whether your melanin game's up here or up or down here, to stop creating that divide and that dehumanizing tool or dehumanizing aspect of race, if we're talking about race in particular. So is it 50 years ago? No. Is it where I want it to be now? Absolutely not. But that's why I'm actively trying to do something about it, as opposed to just let it be.
Sure. And so,
Okay.
along those lines, and I think this is related to just this particular topic, is that Americans overall, over the last 3-4 years, over a while, have felt like crime is a bigger concern than it has ever, or than other things, and overall crime statistics are down, historically, over the last 30 years, just crazily low,
Yeah.
in comparison.
Right.
With that in mind, and the goal of to do the least amount of harm possible while still completing your jobs, do you feel like the way that police departments across the country are becoming more militarized? Or I guess you can answer if you even agree with that statement. But do you feel like the militarization of our police force is even does that even fit the scope of what we're talking about here of doing less harm? We have less crime overall, and we are hoping that people are just better, being a better person overall. Do you feel like giving them more weapons suits that goal better or worse?
I'm always about being equipped to face the threat. Now, deploying it all the time? No, I don't. You got to be measured. You got to deploy it at the right times. But if we go back to the bank robbery in Los Angeles, what was that, in 1996, where the police were woefully under equipped? We don't want anything like that happening. So we want them to have the equipment necessary to respond to those type of threats, but make the response meet the threat or non-threat, if you will. So that's a matter of putting, like, a lot of police departments right now, I believe, are struggling with manpower or personnel. Right, they don't have enough people to do the job. So put enough personnel out there, adequately trained in all these different aspects we talked about earlier. Yes, some specialization with social issues or EMT or what have you, but also people who are generally trained that can respond to an issue and give the proper amount of force, as opposed to, I don't. If an old lady's jaywalking, I don't need to
Right.
deploy an MRAB. I get what you're saying there.
I think and we'll talk because I do want to talk about our reforms, like potential meaningful reforms here in a minute. But I think you had a few other things that you wanted to
Yeah.
to kinda
So
cover.
going back just to base most of this as much as possible on statistics. So I was looking at the pewresearch.org. Basically, they said that police across the country were able to clear cases from high to low, starting with murder at around 52%, aggravated assault at 41%, rape at 26%, robbery at 23%, and then it drops to 13 and 12 and 10 for burglary, larceny, and theft, and motor vehicle theft. And considering that that's the opposite ratio of the number of crimes that are happening.
It's crazy how it's absolute, like almost identically inverse.
Right. So I guess that leads again to kind of like that militarization question. Is that honestly the best way that police forces are able to help
A community.
a community? Because it doesn't. The numbers don't support that.
No, certainly. Now, and I don't want to get too far out of my scope, right? Because I'm not on the organizational head or executive
Sure.
level of making
Yeah,
those
yeah.
decisions and looking at those statistics to
Yeah.
make a honest, intelligent
Uh,
response to specifically that. What I will
yeah.
say is we have nuclear bombs that we rarely use. We have them just in case. So we hope to never have to use them. And I think a lot of that heavier equipment, that militarization equipment, if you will, well, that's because the potential for that threat's out there. But that's not saying we're going to meet that threat every day. But
Right. Okay.
I do believe police departments should be equipped to meet the threat where it is. But no, but have the wisdom to reduce force or use the proper amount of force when possible, when necessary.
So what civilian response would, like an MRAP military style, like APC and like full body armor? Are there civil like militias going around starting fights at the moment? I don't. So like where that seems like a over escalation.
Right, right. No, I would go back to the bank robbery in Los Angeles back in '96. I would. There's been people who in Dallas, Texas. What was that? 2015, 2016, where the gentleman was in a parking garage shooting down on police. And they ended up, I believe, they used a remote bomb to deal with that person. But the point is, it doesn't take a militia to need that kind of equipment. It takes at least just one person with some decent training and equipment that goes through body armor, goes through vehicles, where you're gonna have to respond with that kind of that force or that kind of equipment, because you don't want the people you're responding with just to know they're gonna go in there and die. Like I said, I did
Yeah,
the
no, of
Antietam
course.
study where we saw people are going to line up knowing they're going to get shot. We're
Yeah.
trying to avoid that. Okay,
So-
so that's what the equipment's for.
And so that's fair, except when you arm hundreds and hundreds of police officers, dealing with one situation like that, maybe you're deploying, 50 into a really, really high, like situation like that, where you're facing an armed robbery type people you have like military weapons that could get through just regular, Kevlar vests and stuff, where you need plates and all this military gear. I understand that, but it seems that there is way, 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 way more equipment and way more availability of those type of that type of gear, equipment, of that, I guess, just mentality as well. But that's a separate discussion. But then for that type of scenario.
Okay, but then, not that I'm trying to argue with you or just say
Sure.
I'm correct. I think they're both very, very valid opinions.
Yeah,
But
okay.
I will say, like, if we had more equipment and personnel at the Capitol building on January 6th, would they have gotten in? You see, there's places and times where you need that equipment. You should have seen the DC a few days later. It was completely locked down
Yeah,
by National
yeah,
Guard.
yeah.
So there are times where, or there have been instances in our recent history where, hey, that may have maybe de-escalated the situation by a show of force,
Well,
or prevented it
also,
from getting as bad as it did.
As much as I highly disagree with January 6th protesters and rioters, I also don't believe that there should be a military force opening fire on
No.
an unarmed
No.
group.
No, absolutely
So,
not.
No, I completely agree with
And
that.
and, and,
That's not
and I
what
think and I think to
I know
the
that's-
point
I-
of the National Guard having that shut down is we have the National Guard, which is another reason why the police don't need militarized weapons, especially armored vehicles and all of these kinds of things. Because
beyond a
if
reasonable measure, certainly.
if a situation calls for that kind of response, we have escalating measures of forces to meet those responses. And it seems really, really unjustified, and I think in most cases it escalates these situations into something that they don't need to be. I think that we are coming dangerously close to having a standing army with as well armed as police forces are, and as
and
indistinguishable as
Get
military.
the police state sort of
Right.
talk, and nobody wants to hear that talk. Like,
Right.
That's not helpful
Right.
to democracy.
But I
to
mean,
people.
there's a reason
really-
that we have an army and a police force, and not
Right.
one, because that's what
Right.
the British policed with their military, and there was a reason that we set those up as two very separate things, and to continue over arming officers seems incredibly counterproductive to that mission, especially in respect to historical constitutional context and in respect to the statistics that we are our crime rates are lower than they've ever been, and
The crime we are
police.
having is not violent.
Right, and police
Daily
are
lunch.
more armed than they've ever been. So it's one of those things that it's really hard for me to reconcile.
Yeah, fair enough. Off your wagon. Well, see it. Verify to continue. It just gave me some kind of warning on my. On my
I had the
live
same thing
event.
here a minute
great.
ago.
Well, I feel powerful now. Great. So I don't disagree with you, off your wagon. I just offer a different point of view. So you're right. We have the National Guard for those responses, but my understanding of the National Guard is for the bigger responses and the longer term. Almost, I don't want to use the word occupation, but they have to be in a place for a long time. Where the police are a quicker response to a shorter term problem, if you will. But as for the crime statistics and crime being lower right now versus what it has been, well, how quick can that change?
I
Right?
mean, this is
Based
long term trends. Super long term trends is what we're looking
Right,
at.
I understand,
Crime peaked
but-
in the early '90s,
Right.
and has been on a downward trend ever since.
It was fairly, to your point, Ricky, it was fairly rapid that violent victimizations decreased basically in about 10 years. Everything,
Right.
it
So
did continue to
10
drop.
years from now. Right. So, but say 10 years from now, it dramatically spikes.
But we can
And now we wanna
adjust over, because it was still a couple year period, and those things can be adjust and addressed with. And again, between National Guard and local beat cop, you still have SWAT and various special response teams that are designed to fill in those stop gaps. I think we're kind of beating a dead horse here.
Yeah.
So I
on
got
this
a
one.
question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I got a question here that popped up from Elizabeth Pease. I get the equipment issue, but what about political pressure to enforce racism? I love that question, but that's about who you elect in the office, into the office, and then who you speak out against. If you think someone's enforcing racism, it's on us as a society to constantly call that out. So thank you for that question. So.
Well, and it's on us as a society to demand more accountability and transparency in law enforcement, which obviously I think you would agree law enforcement
100%
pushbacks 1,000% against increasing that
I think
kind
we
of.
both love the cameras on law enforcement,
Yep.
right? I think we agree there.
Just when they suddenly stop working, conveniently at specific times, or when they think they made them stop working and they didn't. Those are always the best ones. But anyway, we're I think kind of running up on time limits here. I think we got a few things. Thin blue line. We talked about this a little bit. Kind of that brotherhood, but. How do you feel about that? It really became popular in the 1960s. I'll let you run with this. This was
Yeah,
your
so
question.
I was I was watching a guy. God, I can't believe I am gonna shout him out, but don't know his name. It was like the Dude Dad or something. And he was a former cop, and he has a bunch of videos out. Some of them I agree with, some of I don't. But this one was informative about the history of the Blue Line, going all the way back to like the Redcoats, and it was originally the Red Line was a line of Redcoats defending their position in a war that they inevitably lost, but it was famous. It was made famous because they did hold their place in one particular battle, and then it sort of got co-opted. I don't know exactly when, but it became extremely popular around the 60s when a Los Angeles police chief basically described black people moving into Los Angeles as an existential threat, and the thin blue line of the police force is going to be the thing that's protecting you. So
that was the wall between them heathen melanin people and
the Black Panthers. Were they talking about them as back then as well?
This was very it was around the time of the
Seems
Black
like the same
Panthers.
time period.
Yeah. The Black Panthers were a little bit later, more like the 70s and 80s. But they definitely, I don't know if they actually did exist in the 60s, but
the Black Panthers existed in the 60s, yeah.
Sure.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, so I guess have you heard that before, or does that I don't know, how does it invoke any sort of reaction to understand the
A little
history
bit,
of it?
because I have not heard that. I want to see that video. I've not heard that specifically before, but what I will say today, 2024, Thin Blue Line means to me about that fellowship that I talked earlier. I'm going to protect you. You're going to protect me. We're going to protect people. That's what it means to me. And if people are violating that to say I'm going to protect corruption or I'm going to protect somebody who hurt somebody, I'm going to lie for them. They don't need to. They don't need to be in law enforcement. And it's calling that out. And so the thin blue line it is what you make it. It is how you enforce it. And that's where I keep putting. Or I'm going to restate this. Good people in law enforcement enforce a good thin blue line. But
there shouldn't be a thin blue line because law enforcement should be part of the community, not a separate entity of the community. And the fact that this is separate. We are our own community. We are a brotherhood, and it's us before anything else. Which is, Blue Lives Matter. They've co-opted this in a term where even if you could try to rose up the thin blue line narrative, it's been co-opted to, it's like a swastika. It didn't always mean Nazis, but it means Nazis now.
Right.
And that's
right. It used to mean healing or peace.
Right. I mean, it meant a bunch of stuff through cultures, but now it's the symbol of Nazism, and that's the same thing with the thin blue line. Is they took that, and the thin blue line is why cops will protect other cops from accountability. The thin blue line is why they have Blue Lives Matter, and you see those stupid flags with the blue line through the middle of them, and all this kind of shit.
Especially since they were in a direct response. That flag was created as a direct response to the Black Lives Matter movement. The creator even said so himself.
Right.
It does seem disingenuous.
And so, that's...
So I'm never, ever going to even try to pretend to be closed-minded. Hearing that, knowing, and hearing that, no, I wouldn't... I would use a different term and make it mean what I want, because I felt a thin blue line didn't mean separate from the community, but we're police within the community, so you should be exercising that community policing. But if that was the origin of it, then I'm not gonna. I wouldn't. I don't. Well, you don't see thin blue line on anything I wear.
No, I haven't. I haven't.
Something completely different. But from my interaction with people who have ever used that term or had those shirts, it was about policing within the community and being a part of the community as opposed to something separate. So I will educate people on that. I'll actually do more research on it myself to educate people on that, but I'm not going to defend it, especially when that's the origins, because that reminds me of people defending the Confederate. I'm sorry, you need me to stop?
No. He just pulled up the link for that video. I'll send it to you later.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
That just reminds me of that reminds me of people defending like the Confederate flag when the origins were very, very profound and very spelled out. So
right.
I completely get that, and I appreciate that info, and I would share that video around as well because that's good info.
Well, I shared it in the chat. I'll send it to you offline a little bit later here. I think I want to hit on, we had a lot of talk on kind of the issues that are in law enforcement. But some of the things that can be done to change this, and a lot of people have a lot of opinions, and we've had some things, and definitely a few things that we agree on. But what would your biggest advocacy, I guess, is people getting involved in law enforcement, and this is where I think, that's incredibly unrealistic. As far as not everybody can just go and become a police officer or has time to volunteer with law enforcement. Has time that's.
We talk about that even just running for office,
right?
We not everybody can be a representative,
or even get involved in politics. I'm very low level involved in my local DFL politics, and I don't even have enough time for that. And that's like a weekend here and there. But I think that it would be really difficult because of the structure of how law enforcement has been set up to alter those things. But I think that there's some things we can talk about on the outside that can be done. And one of my biggest things is insurance, liability insurance for officers to carry at all times. I think, you got doctors and contractors who have to carry liability insurance. And that way, if they do something wrong, their liability insurance covers that. And if you do something wrong enough or do small things enough wrong, you can't get insured. You can't be employed in that profession. And if you can't be employed in that profession, you can't keep hurting people through that profession. A malpractice insurance, something like that.
Hey, and that's capitalism, baby.
That is capitalism. This is one of the few times I'm like, capitalism is the fucking solution here. You know what I mean? And So I think
So,
that is my biggest one. I think that would be the simplest thing to implement that would have the biggest impact.
and I said it in a video before. I love that idea. I am
Mm-hmm.
all for the liability insurance. I personally have liability insurance from my time doing that work. But back to a little pushback. Not everybody can get in law enforcement. The jobs right now available are plentiful. It's an insane amount of jobs, and they're having a very hard time hiring people. And this is not just federal, this is state, this is
Mm-hmm.
local, and this is nationwide. So can I get one person to join a law enforcement, say in Indiana, and change the entire law enforcement? Absolutely not. That's not how it works. But you join law enforcement, maybe you can change not the entire department that you're in, but the division that you're in, the people you're around, right? Or at least influence it enough to where they know, okay, this is a guy who sees things maybe a little different than me. I can't get away with what I used to get away with around here. And think about that. If we get 10 of those people in every PD around the United States, how much would we change law enforcement then? I guarantee you there's over 10 jobs in all of them.
Okay.
So the people who want to make change from inside, you're not going to do it by yourself. I'm not doing it by myself. I'm not changing law enforcement by myself. I change the areas I'm in, the areas I'm around. The same thing I do at the whole ending racing. I didn't just end race in America overnight. I'm ending it at my church or at my kid's school, at my job, but in the particular area that I'm in. So you can make a humongous change internally. You're not going to see it nationwide overnight, but it's just a matter of going out and getting it within the ranks and making the changes from the inside. That's always the most effective way.
Sure. And again, we've had this conversation before, but that's a really lovely idea. And then we see when you have a good cop try to hold bad cops accountable, what happens with Jane Watts, the Florida State Patrol officer who pulled over a Miami PD cop for reckless driving and speeding, and hauled him off to jail because he ran from her. He didn't feel necessary to stop because he's above the law. He's behind that thin blue line. She pulled him over. She thought that nobody was above the law. She hauled him in, and she got harassed, death threats, ran out of the police force. And this is something that like. If you're looking at I want to join to change from the inside as you're advocating for, and then you look at these instances. I mean, there's I'm forgetting the movie as well. It's a true story. The guy.
Oh, there's plenty of them. There's a lot of
Yeah.
movies
The Jake Gyllenhaal one.
Yeah, was that the one where he no. I don't remember. The guy, he went in on a drug
Place
bust.
Beyond the Pines.
He went in on that drug bust and called for backup, and because he'd turned in one of his officers, they left him there, and he got shot. He survived and whatnot. But I mean, it's a story you hear. If you cross that thin blue line doesn't come back and protect you anymore. And so, if you're going to try to hold your fellow officers accountable, you're putting. There we go. Serpico. Sorry.
So with Jane Watts, we know her name for a reason, right? She stood up and did the right thing.
Not that many people do, though.
No, I understand, but she got a huge payout because of the harassment she dealt with. And guess what? Because I was in Florida shortly after that happened and working with some law enforcement. Well, people stopped speeding so much on those roads as a result of her actions, knowing that it could happen again. So I'm not saying it's easy. I will never, ever say that. You don't always have to make an arrest to make the changes. Sometimes it's just by your presence. And people know, okay, I can't screw around nearly as much. But you make a great point. There are people who get crucified for going up against that realm. But there's a lot of good that's been done because of people have gone in there. We just don't hear about it because maybe something that didn't happen that otherwise would have.
And
But
I actually wanted to touch on this on the training and just like the cultural side of being an officer. I've read from like ex-cops that say that like police training is very like militarized in the way that it's like a boot camp and it kind of breaks you down to create a sort of cohesion of that type of group. Do you feel like, especially when considering that that's, it gets used to just sort of let people, you feel like you can't go against that brotherhood because you get put into, you form a bond through training in that way. Do you feel like that's appropriate, or do you feel like that's overblown?
So some of that training, I think, is to give you an idea of your worst day, to know how you're going to respond
No,
because you're
certainly,
training. It's a
certainly.
hiring aspect,
Yeah.
and you want to be able to develop yourself and grow yourself so that so that you can respond in a life or death scenario where you're training, defending yourself or somebody
Right.
else. But regarding breaking that bond, honorable is honorable. Okay, you are either honorable or you're not. Now, I don't think I'm betraying anything if I see somebody hurt somebody and I do the proper thing to bring that person accountable. In fact, I did the right thing and I protected the reputation as opposed to hurt it. So the ones that are, I don't want to use the word weak-minded. You have to be strong-willed enough to do the right thing, even if people are going to be mad at you about it. That goes for law enforcement. That goes for everywhere else.
No, that's totally fair. What I don't know. I know that you are very much against using labels of race.
Oh God, yes.
Obviously,
Yeah,
I totally I hear what you're saying, and everything that you've put out there, I think is fantastic. By the way,
Thank you.
so
Appreciate it.
I appreciate this conversation overall, but I just really appreciate your message. So I wanted to hear what you thought about. Looks like there's a bunch of studies that say that black police officers in black communities actually don't have great like results. Their results are actually mixed on the different like the amount of violence and just deaths overall in the communities. It doesn't show that
Community
there's-
policing may not be as effective as we would think it is. Is that what you're getting at?
Well, just
or
like brown people policing brown people, right?
doesn't necessarily make you more empathetic to the plight of the community. Oh,
No, certainly.
which I think goes just back to that. And I'm sorry, I'm speaking. I'll let you. I'll let you finish. Hold up, but
You're good, of course.
but that once you become a cop, you're blue before you're black and white. And I
Right.
think putting people and this is a site. I'll throw my psychology degree in here a little bit. As soon as you put people into a position of authority, they are almost always going to abuse this, and this has been done in a study where even when it's a pretend situation of authority,
Stanford
the
prison
Stanford study, the
Yeah.
Stanford prison study, you know, they put they gave people arbitrary, you're a guard, you're a prisoner, and then kind of let them play this scenario out, and the quote unquote guards who are in a pretend, they're cosplaying at that point, got very, very abusive because they were put
They had to stop it early.
yeah, they did because they were put in a
Yeah.
position of authority, and it's so now obviously police are put in a position of authority, and regardless of your race or predisposition, you're human, and that is your natural inclination is to abuse that authority, even if you don't think you're going to do it, even if you're a good person when you get into that position. It is really hard to keep that sort of check on a position of authority, and I think that sorry, I'm ADHD spitballing here, but I've always kind of compared law enforcement and their inability to follow simple rules of engagement when policing a community to military, which have very stringent rules of engagement when engaging an enemy combatant force. And I think that maybe that's part of where that comes from is most people on the ground in a military situation are not in a position of authority over other people, and they're following orders, where police are in a position of authority over the community, and that gives them kind of carte blanche to do whatever the fuck they want. And I've got no statistics to back that up. I just came up with
Fair
that
enough.
off the top of my head, but yeah. Sorry. Anyway, you can go on.
So regarding the statistics point, and I'll make this point constantly. When it comes to statistics and you're saying black or white, well, that whole designation is subjective to begin with. And I'm not saying I throw out the statistics, but I take it with a bit of a grain of salt because I have seen people of darker skin in law enforcement positions do great policing for all different skin tones, and I've seen people of lighter skin in areas where it's primarily darker skin people do great policing, and I've seen the bad as well, just like we all have, because it usually makes the news. Now, regarding position of authority, yes, it is. It's an authority to enforce the law, but the priority above authority should be protecting and serving. And if your focus and your highest priority isn't protecting and serving in law enforcement, you shouldn't be there. And that's where the accountability comes in. That's when you vote the police commissioner or what have you out of office. That's when you make your complaints known to the mayor. And I'll keep saying it. That's when you join law enforcement yourself to make protecting and serve the top priority. So I am completely agreeance with you. It is a position of authority, but I don't think that should be the highest thing you would when you think about a law enforcement officer. They're here to help. That should be the focus.
Do you not think, though, that that's potentially contradictory to what you kind of said at the beginning, where like one of the main goals is to come back home, and that overemphasis on personal
Right.
safety? Do you not do you feel like there's a potential conflict there, that those potentially that do the least amount of harm and also to come back home, those, that's the battle, right?
Well, you asked me about what is the metrics of success, right?
Yeah.
And most people internally are thinking, I got to get home alive today. That doesn't necessarily mean you got to kill somebody. Like sometimes that's breaking off the chase.
Sure.
Sometimes, okay, this is a bad situation. It's escalating. Can I get enough voices to reason, or calm voices to reason and put this down? So I'm not saying you got to get back home at all costs, no matter who you hurt. I'm saying you want to get home alive, but you also want everybody else to get home alive, or to whatever their next location is alive, doing us less harm. So I don't think I'm being contradictory, but they do go hand in hand. You don't want to say we're going to protect and serve, but I'm just going to go out here and die. You want to get home alive, doing the right thing, causing as least harm as possible. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And that's a good response. I appreciate that.
Like I said, and I know obviously this is a controversial subject, and it's kind of weird doing this with the lives in the background, because you're getting comments from the peanut gallery as you go on, and you're seeing different comments than I am, which is weird. I figure I don't understand.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah,
we'll
but
figure it out. I'm not even worried about it. One day we'll figure it out.
But it's funny how some people, and I'm sure even listening to the podcast, some people get frustrated feeling that certain things are softball questions and certain things aren't, I'm being too critical of other things. There's somebody in the comments here, I think right now, feeling that I'm being a little too critical of law enforcement in certain situations. And you can't make everybody happy, but
No.
I want to emphasize how we really tried to carefully construct this conversation to be productive, and we're obviously not going to come to an agreement on everything altogether, but having these conversations and allowing people to hear something productive from both sides allows them to help form their own opinions and how they feel that they should interact with these situations, and I really hope that that they can see that, even if they're frustrated that I wasn't grilling you hard enough on something, or I was grilling you too hard on something else.
You never please everybody. You never please everybody.
If anything, I feel like our end goals are 100% aligned, in that we want to help communities, help this country, and just heal communities. And so whether you're successful, we're successful, or we're both successful, I wish you all the success, and I really do hope that your message continues to grow.
So
I appreciate that.
I think we're pretty close to the end if we haven't gone over already. But I wanted to give you a little bit of time to kind of plug your stuff. And there's the old saying, God created all men, Sam Colt made them all equal. And we've had some topics on firearms, gun control, that sort of thing in the past, these kind of discussions. This is something that a lot of times even my own followers are at odds with me on my perspectives on this. And I'm at odds with everybody, people on the left and the right. Nobody agrees with me on this, unless, like you said, you go far enough left, you get your guns back, and that's kind of where I'm damn near Karl Marx on that side. But you are trying to promote equity and equality through empowering people through firearm training and accessibility and that sort of thing. And one thing we've talked
That's
about
certainly part of it. Yep.
Is gun control has historically, statistically been racist, often intentionally, and even when it's not intentionally, it still ends up being racist, because anytime you put a price point, or when drugs are a felony crime that prevents people from owning a firearm, but African Americans are more likely to be charged with those crimes than white people.
Classifying the same drug in different forms,
like
differently,
crack
because
versus
it's
cocaine
used in two different. Yeah.
Yep.
So obviously, and a lot of times these disenfranchised communities are the ones who need protection the most. A lot of times, accessibility to firearms is something that has moved political justice, civil rights movements forward. Like the Black Panthers are a great example of using a militarized presence to protect their own communities because they couldn't rely on police to do that, and to make a statement that got attention was controversial, but it was definitely made huge strides in law enforcement. It also made huge strides in gun control. That's the reason that California's gun control laws are what they are. Is it made Ronald Reagan very uncomfortable that black people had guns in the street, so suddenly they weren't allowed to do that anymore. So just I'll let you kind of plug what your mission is here with that, and go ahead.
No, I appreciate that. So yeah, episode 11 of you guys podcast gives a really good account of the history of the gun laws. I thought that was very intriguing. There's a lot of things I learned about short barrel rifles and short barrel rifles and suppressors, everything. You guys touched on everything, so that was really cool. But as for what we're doing, yes, part of what we do is sell guns, but the main thing we're doing is ending race in America, to end the divisive and dehumanizing tool that it is and was meant to be. The history on it is very clear. It was really promoted here in the United States to enable slavery. Let's see, I just disconnected with you on here. Great, good to go. But anyway, it was really promoted and created to enable slavery. And what I say to people who would like to join this cause, it's really simple. It's free. Just look within yourself, ask yourself why you're calling yourself black or white. And if you're not comfortable with it, start questioning it, do the research. And yeah, you're not going to change the entire United States in a day, but you can change your household. You could change your school, your areas within your school, areas within your job. So Ending Race in America, you check out our website for it. It's all on my profile. And I really appreciate you guys having me, because you're doing fun work. And maybe we'll come back and talk about another subject one day. That'd be cool.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being on. It's been too long since we've kind of gone through and done this.
Yeah,
once again, I appreciate it. I know it's not easy coming on here and getting grilled on stuff, especially when, a lot of times it's differences of opinions, but we like having that. I think that makes for the most rich, productive conversations. Obviously, we hate echo chambers, and we try to do our best to not have them, and having you on definitely helps break those echo chambers. We appreciate the hell out of you being here, and we'll see everybody next week. I want to remind people that we've got merch on offjoewagon.com. We got a
Patreon. Cool ass sticker on here, man. Get a koozie.
We got a Patreon.
That's right.
And
Google membership, YouTube membership.
We got all kinds of stuff. Also follow me, Off Joe Wagon, on all the socials. Follow Ricky Wade. Ricky, what's your plug again?
The American Redneck Company on TikTok. Yeah.
All right.
The American Redneck Company on YouTube. So yeah, that's us.
Get his. Go follow him if you're interested in kind of seeing more what he's working with. And we love y'all. Appreciate you following.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in, and thank you, Ricky.
We'll see you next week.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys. Be safe.
All right, you can hang on for a minute. We'll thank you so much for
thank you guys. Getting off. So let me end this. Woo! No, that was fun, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, we appreciate the hell out of you coming on and being willing to do this. And like I said, we've been...
I'll do it again, man.
Yeah.
Think of other topics, and all I need is maybe a couple of days heads up. I could usually just take off work, and I hate what one day soon. Are we on? Are we live?
No. So we can cut out anything after this point. So.
Okay. One day soon, I'll get to talk about my real story, or not that I'm lying,
No, I know
the whole story. Yeah. So
I had one person in the comments who was just like, ask him this. He was really hell bent on the fact that you weren't specifically like a beat cop and whatnot. And I'm like, for fuck's sake, first of all, this is a live second, a podcast first. I'm just giving you guys kind of some behind the scenes, and they were going
That's awesome.
on and on. And I'm like, I can't explain to you. I mean, it was nice enough for you to be on here, and I don't want to violate your confidentiality and trust on that. So, but yeah, it's just
all good. And I appreciate you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I enjoyed it.
All right.
Yeah, man.
Thank you guys
we'll definitely
for
have
good questions.
We'll definitely have you back on because I think there's so much more to explore. Certainly with just discussing, I think just race as a topic, we really
that's my forte.
Right, and we really kind of brushed the surface there, only in the the framework of policing. So I know I'd love to break into that more. I mean, maybe some.
Oh, dude, if we talked about it within corporate America within healthcare.
Yeah.
I would actually love your opinions on it as well. That would be really fun to talk about.
Sure.
Yeah, well, absolutely. We'll plan that on, and we will let you go because we're gonna film another episode here for everybody in the live. We are going to just kind of reset, and we will be doing just an episode, Taylor and I, on current events, and I'll let you guys hang out for that if you want.
Wow. Such
Be safe.
access. Yeah. Thanks, Ricky.
All right.
All right.
Take it easy, guys.